Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating essay by author Zhu Feng titled The Path of Genius. Have you ever actually stopped to wonder why so much human potential just goes completely unrealized? Why some brilliant minds literally change the world, while others are just seemingly forgotten by history? Well, let's get into it. Zhu Feng proposes a highly provocative framework here, arguing that innate talent is really just a tiny fraction of the equation, and he uses some brilliant historical and modern examples to prove his point. Zhu Feng opens his essay with a startling, even mathematically bleak premise. According to his observations, for every 10 geniuses born into the world, 9 of them go completely unrecognized. Just think about the gravity of that for a second. 90% of the world's most brilliant, paradigm-shifting minds have their immense potential buried. They never make it to the history books, the patent offices, or the world stage. But why? And this brings us right to the core of his thesis. Zhu Feng boldly argues that innate talent is basically useless on its own. If you're a genius, but you lack the right environment and the nurturing soil for growth, you inevitably become what he bluntly terms waste. It doesn't matter what your IQ is or how revolutionary your ideas are. Without the right conditions, a genius simply cannot survive, let alone thrive. So, let's explore this with Section 1, the Elon Musk hypotheticals. To really hammer this point home, the author takes us through some extremely vivid thought experiments to break down this whole concept of soil. Zhu Feng poses a scenario. Elon Musk is undoubtedly a genius, right? But what if he had never left his birthplace? On one hand, we have the reality we know, Musk in the USA, developing Starlink and planning to colonize Mars. On the other hand, the hypothetical, Musk remaining in South Africa. Zhu Feng concludes it's highly unlikely Musk would have achieved his current massive success had he stayed. Why? Because, according to the author, that specific region just lacked the necessary nurturing soil, the capital, the specific tech ecosystem, the regulatory framework, required for his particular brand of genius to actually take root and flourish. He then builds this into an even more provocative, politically charged scenario. What if Elon Musk were Chinese and lived in China? If he walked around boldly proposing plans to build rockets and colonize Mars, what would happen? Well, the author argues that instead of being hailed as a visionary billionaire and securing massive funding, he might face a drastically different reality. Zhu Feng suggests he could very well be confined to a mental institution. Now, we aren't endorsing any viewpoints here, we're just exploring how Zhu Feng uses this stark contrast to argue that a genius's ideas can be viewed as either totally revolutionary or outright insane, entirely depending on the societal environment they're planted in. Moving right along to Section 2, the Christopher Columbus hypotheticals. Okay, so that covers the macro environment, the big soil. But what about the micro environment? The absolutely crucial point here is that genius isn't just threatened by society at large. It's threatened by the mundane, trivial details of daily life. Zhu Feng looks at Christopher Columbus, the man credited with discovering the New World, but he playfully hypothesizes a scenario. What if Columbus had a narrow-minded, fiercely jealous wife? Just imagine Columbus trying to plan these perilous maritime adventures while dealing with constant accusations of affairs. The author imagines an unreasonable spouse outright banning his expeditions, yelling, "As long as I'm alive, you'll remain at home and not go anywhere." The sheer weight of providing for a family and managing household drama could have entirely erased the discovery of the Americas. Using this highly theatrical contrast between navigating the perilous open ocean and, battling a spouse in the living room, Zhu Feng arrives at a firm and pretty controversial belief. He states that marriage, family, and the burden of trivial daily responsibilities bury exactly half of the world's geniuses, 50%. It's a striking statistic that really forces you to ask how many monumental discoveries were literally canceled just because someone had to stay home and pay the bills. Which brings us to Section 3, the ancient doctor's hypotheticals. So we've got the soil and we've got the personal environment. The third major barrier to genius is timing. Zhu Feng shifts his focus here using legendary figures from Chinese history. Absolute titans of historical medicine. Hua Tuo, Li Shizhen, Bian Kui, Sun Simiao, Zhang Zhangjing. These are undisputed medical geniuses from antiquity who revolutionized healthcare, anatomy, and pharmacology during their respective eras. Their genius perfectly aligned with the needs and the allowances of their specific time. But look at what happens when you alter that timing. Zhu Feng argues that if these exact same brilliant minds lived in today's China, utilizing their traditional and maybe unconventional by modern standards methods, they wouldn't be revered, not at all. Instead, they'd be labeled unlicensed quacks. The author notes they would likely be detained or forced to quit under modern laws for practicing medicine without a license.
To summarize this beautiful tragedy, Xu uses a really poetic analogy. He says exotic flowers cannot survive in winter. You can be the most brilliant flower in existence, but if you bloom in the wrong season, you're going to freeze.
All right, section 4, the 4 core elements.
Having explored these 3 wildly different what-if scenarios, from rocket ships to wooden caravels to ancient herbs, we can finally extract the core philosophical framework here. According to the author, the path of genius absolutely requires a perfect alignment of 4 inseparable elements. You need the soil, that's the societal foundation. You need the environment, your personal and immediate surroundings that actually allow you to work. You need freedom, meaning the total lack of trivial, mundane constraints holding you back. And finally, fortune, or timing, being born in the exact right era for your specific talents to be recognized and utilized.
And this framework reveals the incredibly high stakes we're dealing with. We can see step by step exactly how those 9 out of 10 geniuses we talked about at the very beginning end up buried. Step 1, they perish early on without the appropriate soil and environment. Step 2, even if they survive that, they can't fulfill their ambitions without a free living environment. They just get tied down. And step 3, if they somehow make it past all that, they're suppressed and oppressed if their timing is unfavorable. It is a brutal gauntlet, and honestly, only a fraction survive it.
Now for the final piece, Section 5, Reaching the Ultimate State.
For the final act of this explainer, Xu takes a really fascinating turn from worldly success, like, tech empires and sea voyages, directly into the spiritual realm. The author argues that possessing the incredibly high spirituality, the profound insight, and the sheer perseverance required to achieve ultimate enlightenment, to actually become a celestial being or a Buddha, means that one must inherently be a genius. It requires a level of mental and spiritual processing that goes way, way beyond average human capacity.
Therefore, achieving this ultimate spiritual state isn't some mystical exception to the rule. It requires following the exact same path we just outlined for earthly inventors. First, the spiritual seeker has to actively find the right soil and environment conducive to growth. Second, they must ruthlessly break free from all trivial constraints on their freedom, basically abandoning the mundane distractions of daily life. And finally, step 3, they have to leave fortune and timing up to fate, recognizing that some things are simply beyond their control.
So, as we wrap up this explainer on Xu incredible framework, we're really left having to look inward. The path of genius isn't just a historical curiosity, it's a mirror. Have you found your soil? Or are you, like so many potential geniuses throughout history, currently bound by the mundane? It's a super provocative thought to leave you with, and one that just might change the way you structure your own life and ambitions. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this framework sparks a totally new way of thinking about your own potential.